Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Decisions Under Fire, hosted by 3AM and the CalChiefs. My name is Christy LaPlante. I am the Vice President of Marketing for 3AM Innovations, and I'm thrilled to serve as moderator for today's very interesting panel discussion with the CalChiefs. Before we dive in, I had a few housekeeping items for us to keep in mind. First, as noted in your registration, this webinar is being recorded for you. So each of you will receive a link to view the recording at the email address you used to register. We will email that link to you before the end of this week, but if you have any questions in the meantime, you're always welcome to reach out to us directly. All of our contact information is available on our website, www.3am, that's the number 3am.info, info. So that's the first thing. Second, this webinar has a Q&A feature. So if you are in Zoom, you will see that Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Should you think of any questions during today's webinar that you want to pose to the Chiefs, you can drop those into that Q&A feature throughout today's discussion. I've reserved 10 minutes at the end of the session to review your questions live with the Chiefs. So pop them in there as you think of them, and I'll take a look at that at the end of the session. Finally, before we get started, the Chiefs asked that we share a brief overview of 3AM Innovations and what our software can do to prepare everyone for today's conversation as we talk through the application of that software in real-world scenarios. 3AM Innovations was created from loss. A member of the Buffalo Fire Department was tragically lost due to on-scene confusion at a structure fire in Western New York several years ago. While that loss was deeply felt, there were lessons to be learned, and it inspired our co-founders to look for new ways to solve some of the challenges faced by firefighters when they're on scene to ensure they make it home safely. We hear often the biggest asset in firefighting is your people. Tracking those individuals, knowing where they are at all times, be they deep inside a structure or out in the wildlands, using that knowledge to create redundancies, providing more opportunity to use real-time actionable information, being able to step in or help with more immediacy or more accuracy, right? Communicating across responding units without adding to a workload. These are just a handful of the challenges that we set out to address. Here to provide a bit of context about our platform and its capabilities for the sake of our discussion in a few moments with the CalChiefs is 3AM's co-founder and COO, Ryan Litt. Ryan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Christy. I'm sharing my screen. Are we seeing it?
Oh, let me get mine off and you should be able to share. There you go.
Let's give it another try.
There it is.
How about now? Good. All right, excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thank you very much, Chiefs, for joining us. It is an honor, truly. To reiterate, of course, as Christy already identified, our company was inspired by tragedy. We understood that fundamentally, if we had a role to play, not that we think technology is going to prevent certain lines of duty deaths that occur, we feel like there is space for it to help. And so it's 100% what we're committed to do. We understand that safety and accountability starts from the station, is inspired by tactics in the fireground. But one of the things that we fundamentally saw as a gap and as a place that we really needed to focus on as we explored the country and understood from real firefighters and fire commanders was the dismounted firefighter. The idea that we track our people once they leave the vehicle, it was a clear gap and a place that we felt deserved to be addressed. So it's the place that we started from. We fundamentally believe that from that spot onwards, we learn more, we can automate more, and we can help to inspire and support certain decisions that occur on the fireground. So what you're seeing here is an early build of our product. Everything I'm going to show you today is real demos, real replays. And in these cases, we took real inspiration from commanders and officers alike to understand that once we start tracking our people, what are we really looking for? What are the outcomes that we seek? And in some cases, sure, it may be to see the dots. And in other cases, it may be to see none. So as you see now, hopefully, we are abstracting and removing and taking them off the screen or adding them in. They're always there. And of course, we are tracking people continuously. So if an alert occurs, we will bring that to the surface. But that way we enable the user and the person to kind of tune their view to their needs. A safety officer, for example, may want to see things entirely different than an incident commander. So fundamentally for us, the idea of progressive enhancement, as we've written here, is take advantage of certain data points and show those things depending on the user and depending on the need. As we continued and worked with departments, we recognized that there was a lot of devices and different capabilities that already exist out there. They just might not be taken advantage of. So very common for us, we may see a GPS-enabled radio. You can see GPS-enabled tablets. You can see GPS trackers, watches, AVL. All these things were fairly common, but they weren't unified into view. And so we immediately proceeded to open up that platform so that we can take in anything that you already use. Because for us, it's to complement, not complicate your operation. We knew the more we could do that, the faster we could bring some technology and put it in your hands. But as we explored, we learned a little bit. There were some departments out there that were actually using mobile phones. I know it's kind of the swear word to some groups. And honestly, I avoided it like the plague to start. But then I worked with groups and they say, hey, sometimes I go into these facilities and my radio doesn't work, but my phone does. 5G or whatever at the time, probably 4G. But it was really more about financial incentives. Certain building owners make sure that there's cell phone connectivity because they want to make money, but aren't as prioritized, unfortunately, on the safety communications. So they used it as a tool. And I asked them, honestly, if we were going to do this, I know phones are kind of a hot topic. What does it look like? And we thought about when you go to a supermarket and you run to to bring your items out at the register. A lot of times those are Windows computers that are running a kiosk mode. The kids, all they can do is just scan the item. There's nothing else that they can do. So we took that sort of approach with a phone. So it's less of a phone and more of a device. We just happen to be taking advantage of all those sensors and things that are possible and see what we can do to it with it. How much can we expand awareness and safety on the fire ground? So one of those places was for myself embedding on many departments is, people that get stepped on in radio communications and watching chiefs and safety officers and aides, putting multiple radios against their ears on different channels, listening basically for distress. And so from that, we said, hey, if a phone's a real option, why don't we take advantage of some of the things that phones can do? And one of those things was artificial intelligence. And this was before, ChatGPT was helping kids cheat through college. It was in 2020, and we reached out to Microsoft and we developed specific AI only for the fire ground. I had to go through panels to get authorized to do it. But it was to strip all the ambient noises that occur on the fire ground, listen for tactical and operative words of concern, and trigger awareness so that safety officers, ICs, aides, et cetera, will get that as soon as humanly possible, and we prevent being walked on. From there, we got a call from some fire departments in Sacramento County in California. And they said, hey, we've seen some videos. We can see that you can track people. We're running a prescribed burn. Will you come out and support us? We want to watch our operators while they execute. So we came out and did it. Again, this is an early version of our product from probably about 3 years ago. And it's all real time. As you may notice on the bottom there's a little player. This is a replay of a real event. And this is something that feeds into sort of after action and hot washing and things we'll discuss in a moment. But this is a real event with real people, and we have permission to show this off. And it was very early. But we've been thinking about WUI just as much as we've been thinking about urban firefighting. But we understood that this takes time, and we got to grow with the department and make sure that we get this right. And obviously as a reinforcement, as we continue to go around the country, just as an example, Chief Gardner from Ventura, reiterates kind of the needs for tracking resources and the positive outcomes that can come from those. Those are good because we care about that. We don't want to work on things that people don't care about. We're here to serve you and serve the service. We want to make sure we're working on the right thing. So to recap on what Florian does, it is designed to adapt and serve you throughout all phases of all hazards. And on a simple sort of modality of thinking about our phases, we think about en route, on scene, and after action. En route, more on that response-driven support, right? What kind of critical information that we can bring you that's contextual and relevant to the actual incident that you're going to, and not making people navigate through drop downs and buttons and things and making it more complicated than it needs to. Bring the right information to the front and focus on it so that we can empower the officers and the chiefs alike so that it can inspire their tactics once they get to the fire ground. Of course, every chief has taught me that accountability starts at the station. So who's on the rig is also a piece of that equation. Once we get there, it's all about automation, decision support. We just want to trigger alerts and kind of bring the things to the surface as you want them, and that's it. And then fundamentally, once we get into after action, all this data is yours. You can use it, you can disperse it into other means that you see necessary, but also you can replay it. And as I kind of showed you, and I will continuously show you for the next few minutes, everything you're seeing are real events that we are replaying through our system. So your departments can do that, and they can do that forever. It's your data for as long as you want it. Sometimes I hear from unions that want to sort of get things wiped off the grid after a certain period of time, self-destruct buttons and things. But I think most departments like that idea, and that way we can use that for the greater good down the line. So the next question I get from most people is, what does it look like for my operators? Like, what is it like using Florian? It's basically as simple as being handed the device and putting it wherever you're instructed to put it. So usually it's in a pocket. But in this particular case, this is a wildland-urban interface evolution. This was in a safety brief. The devices were handed out. This individual's kind of taking a peek at it. It's like, that's it. And then put it in his pocket. And that is the end of their experience. In marine-based operations, water-based operations, same thing, right? Now, in these cases, you can use a phone, you can use a watch, you can use some different things. In this particular case, this operator used a watch, waterproof in the water, and actually he wanted to check in, like, so what exactly happened? Because he didn't really have to change anything about what he did. And he wanted to see what the people could see on the other side. And then, of course, in suppression, it's, put it in your turnout gear and proceed. Now, again, in these cases, these are phones, but again, as we noted earlier, there are other devices that are possible as well. For the officer experience, something I care a lot about since, first in, a lot of times you're going to get your engines, your ladders, especially if we're talking about suppression and things, they're getting there first. So how much can we help to empower them to be safer once they get there? So in particular, we have, what we call workspaces. You can configure these as tiles, and they can point to any data sources that are relevant to your department, and they will contextualize on the nature of the event. So if you're rolling in on an emergency medical call, you're probably going to want to see things a little differently than if you're rolling into, a fire call. Hazardous materials, you might want to see Title IIIs or SARA documents, et cetera. So all these sorts of things, I think they need to be relevant to the incident. But as you see here, top left is boots on the ground. Show me what's happening as it's transpiring, as people arrive, as they dismount. On the top right, aerial photography, for example, if this is a structure fire, give me some ideas of what's happening on the roof and what do I need to think about. Street view and points of access and entry makes sense. And then continuous stream from your emergency operations centers and your communication centers. To juxtapose that, when we go into wildland urban interface, there's not always streets and roads and things. So one thing on the top left you can see is as the operators move into off-road, we have breadcrumbs to let other arriving units know where they've gone and even follow suit, follow those paths. Officers, obviously, and those experiences aren't all made equal. In this case, for example, this was at a very, very, very large special event. And point of emphasis here, I'm going to show you largely special events because I have permission to do so. If you want to see some, deeper experiences, just contact Izzy and our team, and we'll put that together. Under private context, I have authorization to show more. But here, for example, this was a very large event, 250,000 people in one small space. And so we had cross-agency, a lot of concerns for terrorism, between fire, the United States military, the feds, public safety, et cetera. So in these cases, we're sweeping for weapons, biological, explosives, et cetera. And we wanted to hit 100% on every evolution. So in this case, for example, the officer noticed, and I guess you can maybe see in the image here, but there's a little gap, and he redirected the units to go back and make sure to get 100% coverage. And that was through seeing his breadcrumbs and where his units were operating. On a supervisory, so once we get into the span of control and it starts to get big and we're talking about wildland fires and things like that, We all understand the internet is not flush in all the places, even though all the commercials like to tell us that it is. So we want to make sure that the application can continue to function without the internet. But if in the event that we have other tools, if we have mesh radio systems and other communication pathways, we want to make sure that the software can actually share some data too. So in this case, this was at Camp Roberts near San Diego, and we were operating 3.6 kilometers very deep in a canyon, no internet, and we only had a few caps that we were able to put on operating units and see everything in real time. As another example, this was with San Bernardino Fire and some neighboring agencies. This was a sort of interrupt between both internet and non-internet, or connection and not connection, as well as multi-agency and deployment. As we see here, we've got a three-dimensional terrain view that's available all the time. When we have the internet, we can enrich that terrain with satellite photography. We're seeing real-time animations of operators as they move. There's an active fire line or grid. Also here, we dropped a video.
Take the other guys with us?
Yep. We'll split up now.
And so this, from an accountability standpoint and awareness check-in, we have some videos. They're geospatially dropped and people can review them at their discretion. So we can toggle back and forth. We can roll up and down on our units. We can even send some geospatial destinations on that grid. And these things can occur both online and offline. So there's a couple more examples here. I showed you previously with the water-based operation. So as an example here, this is that operator moving through the ocean. And you can see, I hope, the breadcrumb pathing that happens into the ocean as well. I think of particular interest here is that this individual called a mayday. It was a training evolution, so it's not real, so I can show you. But at the end of the day, they called the mayday in the ocean, and the artificial intelligence still detected them saying mayday in the ocean as well. And this would be an experience, for example, that the incident commanders were watching this evolution from their command vehicle in the back of the truck. You can kind of see that sort of around in the image here. Another example here is in Washington State. Also have permission at least to show this image. And this was a shooter event exercise, multi-agency. And in this particular case, the fire chief wanted to ensure that any fire medic personnel were not in the line of fire. So there was sort of a hot zone as it was being cleared, and he was being alerted of people as they crossed in to that geofence, into that space that he didn't want people to be. Another thing that happens, of course, when we think about urban, we sometimes think about height, right? And so, for example, this is a high-rise structure where we've got people doing primaries, and largely this is a training evolution, to be clear, but we've got that sort of three-dimensional understanding as high as it needs to go. Now, questions that I always get are like, okay, now that I have people in space, what can I do with it? You can augment your view depending on how you want to see things. This is a real incident commander that said, hey, I want to see the heights of each person, and I want to see it pop off. In these cases, we're thinking about officers and kind of leaders of groups and squads, but fundamentally, this is what they wanted to see. And they turned it, ironically, even though they had all 3D, they turned it flat so they could stare down and they wanted to see that. So no problem. You can do that with Florian as well. This is another one, for example. This was at a WeWork, an emergency medical response. Same kind of thing. We're navigating through the structure, and these things are all real time. Again, you can see down below, these are real videos that were just literally, not really videos, we're replaying it through our system. Another example is when we think about the remote experience. So that kind of covers our incident command and safety officer aid kind of experience. What happens in a remote capacity? So naturally, you have your emergency operations center. This was an event that just happened a couple of weeks ago, actually, in San Francisco. And this was the view that they wanted, right? So they've got all the various street cams and internal cameras, and then they were juxtaposing that with Florian on the left-hand side here. And I'll show you a couple of more examples. So this is a real example from that event, and you'll kind of see them turning it up. Right now, I think we're looking at sort of more of our upper level, so now we've expanded into the rest of the units. We can see the respective teams as they're operating in real time and in three-dimensional space all throughout this region of San Francisco. So that gives you that kind of view. I mean, I think for all of us, some of that stuff's really interesting. I think it makes the most amount of sense for remote operators that can really take the time to digest all the details. But it's always available. And if anybody wants it, they can have it anywhere they are in the world. Another example here is the Super Bowl. We supported that. This is a more accurate view to what I would argue an incident commander would want to see on premise. But in this particular case, this was a mobile command unit that was significantly offsite, and they were just looking at their officers throughout the evolution. I mean, that one went, I don't think it was 17 and a half hours long because the Rams won. And then last but not least, sometimes we have interface with private property, right? We go into resorts and different things. So this is a significantly accelerated, I think it ran for 8 hours and 13 minutes. I'm probably over time as we speak, but we can see all of the units operating in hyper fast, but that's just so that I can get through all of this together. But these sorts of views, I think they make a lot of sense when you've got big screens and you can sit back and process it. I think it makes a lot of sense and it helps people to be safe. And last but not least, the only other part of emphasis here from our standpoint, this is your data. This is not our data. And I think it's really important. We all understand from a greater good standpoint that some of this data can go to other places, into prediction, into understandings. I know from Lori Moore in the United States Fire Administration, we want to increase the life expectancy of every firefighter. But if every piece of data is siloed, firefighters are still being denied insurance claims, and that just hurts my heart. So at the end of the day, all this data is available. It's all inside of the system, and you can share it into the places that you decide you want it to go to help you and your communities, your jurisdictions be safer. That's not up to me. That's up to you. And we'll help you do it if you need any help doing it, but it matters. And that's how we, I think, take that next step. So with that, hopefully I didn't go too far over, Christy.
You're great. You were great, Ryan. Thank you so much for that and for that context. And if you don't mind on sharing your screen, I'd like to finally, we'll turn it over to the Chiefs who have joined us today. Our panelists from the California Fire Chiefs Association. Please welcome Chiefs Jeffrey Meston, Ray Geik, and Brian Fennessy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. Chief Geik, I'll start with you. Throughout your career, you've seen a variety of incidents, large and small. As we think about the protection of our communities and of our personnel in those situations, what are some of the benefits that this software, the real-time tracking of individual firefighters, what benefits do you think that can bring to the response effort?
Thanks, Chrissy. Well, I think the first thing I look at is, I look at where the fire service has been, where it's going. I know I've been in the fire service for over 30 years, and I know the other gentlemen are probably longer than that in the fire service. So the reality is what we used to not do very well is track things, and we started tracking fire engines through AVL, and that was a big deal. And I know over the last 5 years, we started to track inventories and products and equipment and medical supplies and all these other things that we spend a tremendous amount of money on tracking because we want to be accountable to our budgets. We want to be accountable to a lot of different things. But one of the things we haven't done a very good job, in my opinion, in the past is tracking the most valuable thing we have in the fire service, which is our people and the firefighters that go out and do this kind of work. So, working with 3AM, that was one of the things that really excited me, was the fact that we have this capability of tracking our personnel different and more effectively than we ever have in the past. And that's super exciting for me. When I look at it from I'm a municipal, department type of fire chief, and I work in a city. I don't have a big wildland area like Chief Fennessy does. But if I looked at it from what I would use personnel tracking for is, number one, firefighter safety. That's the biggest thing I can look at, is why is that important? When you start looking at the X, Y, and Z axis, and I start getting height, that's a big deal. When we can start actually tracking our personnel through, it doesn't have to be a huge building. It can be a single family residence, and we know, how many firefighters get killed a year in a little tiny 1,000 square foot, 2,000 square foot home. We just simply don't know where they are. And this is a game changer for firefighters that have the ability to, either call a Mayday or someone on their crew call a Mayday and pinpoint where that person is very quickly. there's so many incidents you look at when you kind of debrief them over the years and look at the tragedies that have happened, that if this technology was there and they were using it, they were training on it, maybe those outcomes are different today. And that's what excites me about it, of where we can really go with this technology. And really it's about, for me, it's about this thing in my hand. It's a telephone, and having the ability, and I'm excited to see where the fire service is going to go with cell phones. Because I do think, and we can get into that a little bit later, but I think that's something I'd like to touch on at some point, is kind of where we see the fire service going with some of this stuff. So I know in the city of Ontario, we have some very, very large buildings. We have one of the largest, if not the largest, Amazon building in the world. It's over 10 stories tall. It's over 3 million square feet, and it's a massive building. And to have the ability to track our firefighters and something like that, it's not uncommon for us to have over 1 million square foot buildings in our city. We're a very big logistics hub in Southern California. And the reality is we really need to be able to track our personnel in those kind of buildings. So it's just incredible technology. We're really looking forward to seeing where it goes. And so that's one of the things. The other thing I think that I really want to touch on is probably from a training aspect. Having the ability to really debrief or hot wash an incident with your incident commanders after everything's said and done, and look at things, what real firefighters did in real time, is a big deal. And it brings a realness and a reality to our debriefs, because a lot of things get lost in the, when you're actually on the incident. And I see it as an absolute incredible training tool in the future. So that's kind of where some of those two big things I can think off the top of my head of why tracking our firefighters is so important to someone like myself.
That's excellent. And I do want to touch on you mentioned cell phones too. I think that is important to touch on, right? I think technology has evolved quite a bit over the past several days, let alone decades, and making the best technologies available to fire service, I think, would be important. Great summary there, Chief Meston. I'd love your opinion too on that. Especially when it comes to tracking personnel individually and the time-based nature of that. I know you, in your career, you've done some work with some hazards and events. We've talked quite a bit, you and I, about the Cedar Fire as well. Time tracking, knowing where people are, that's certainly critical in an event like that. Do you want to walk us through kind of your findings and what you learned from that experience and how this technology could help there?
Absolutely. I'd like to start by sharing a little bit about the Cedar incident and why that became a lifelong interest of mine, to be able to find out where our firefighters are. So it's nearly 20 years ago, October 29th, 2003, when Novato Fire District units, which is right outside of San Francisco, were dispatched down to San Diego, nearly 500 miles away. And during that event, I had an engine company, Engine 6162, staffed with 4 people. I had Captain Doug McDonald, Engineer Sean Krebs, firefighter Steve Rucker, and firefighter Barrett Smith, and they were assigned to the Cedar Fire. Unfortunately, during their deployment, that engine company was burned over, and we lost the life of Stephen Rucker, and Captain Doug McDonald was burned 28% of his body. It was the first time that we recognized or had experienced that a municipal firefighter lost his life protecting a structure down in an event. And during that period of time, ironically, Chief Fennessy was the operations chief of the city of San Diego. So we have some kinship there. One of the things that we discovered during that, as we tried to recover from this massive event, was that many people saw many things that could have prevented our employees from getting killed or injured, but they didn't have the capabilities to do that. We had a CAL FIRE helicopter was flying overhead, running out of fuel. They saw a change in fire behavior, but they had no way to communicate with our ground personnel. And you might think, well, you have radios. Well, we did. We did have our radios, but because we were a rainbow strike team, we had units that didn't have the radio. So we gave up all but one of our portable radios to other units. And ironically, when Doug McDonald was burned so badly, trying to save Stephen Rucker's life by trying to drag him inside the structure, he lost his radio and was burned up. So we had the helicopter that went over, saw the change in fire behavior. They had no way of getting a hold of us. We had Forest Service crews on site that saw the change in fire behavior, and they withdrew their troops to a safe area, which is something that we purposefully do. And Captain McDonald and his crew had identified the houses where they were going to go save themselves. Now, I won't get into the details of the fatality itself, but I will share with you that after this event happened, we as an organization said we need to make sure that every firefighter has a round trip home. And with that, we sought out to engage all of our members in a project to help us heal from the event. So we put together committees, and was lucky enough to work in an organization that we could spend some money on that. So we put together an apparatus committee, a communications committee, an equipment committee, a fire behavior committee, a personal protective equipment committee, a training and experience committee, a policy and tactics committee, and a human factors committee. And we put together what we called the Novato Fire District Engine 6162 Crew Entrapment, Fatality, and Burn report. And what we did is, as we investigated all these areas, we learned a lot of lessons. We learned, for example, that our fire apparatus had plastic brake lines. And that's how fire apparatus were made in that day. Well, when an engine's exposed to heat, it pricks a lot of holes in there. And we were very fortunate that the air system didn't fail when we were trying to drive out a scenario. We also realized pretty quickly that 20 years ago, we had no technology. So we sent firefighters away 500 miles away. They didn't know the fire behavior. They didn't know the mapping of the area. They didn't know about the wind patterns, onshore and offshore flow in that San Diego area. We had no clue about any of that, nor did we have really good situational awareness at all. One of the things that we really identified was we had really no way to track our firefighters. And we've spent nearly 20 years as an organization trying to figure out how best to track our personnel. The ability to be able to call a Mayday or somebody else to call a Mayday could have really made the difference between Stephen Ruckin dying and Doug McDonald being burned or not. So, you know, we had a big stake in that event. We thought it was pretty tragic. And the reality is today's technology, although it's improving on a regular basis, not every firefighter has the ability to be tracked or has the resources right now to be tracked. And we really think that needs to change. So again, when we look at this tragic event nearly 20 years ago, it impacted our organization, and it changed every member's life forever. It also changed Stephen Rucker's wife's path, as did his children. And if we would have had that technology then, and if we could have done a Mayday, or the units that saw the fires change in behavior could have let us know that, I wouldn't be telling you this story today. I'd be talking about some other event, not necessarily the Cedar Fire. So it's very, very tragic. And that was my perspective as a fire chief of an agency that sent a fire truck 500 miles away. And the first I learned of it was a phone call. I got a phone call that said, "Hey, by the way, we think we lost your whole crew." Thank God I didn't. I only lost one member of that. But, Doug McDonald, again, was severely burned, 28% of his body, and he's still suffering from that today. That was my perspective on that. But I think a perspective that might be useful is our operations chief at that time, Chief Fennessy. It was a large event. We had a lot of resources. In those days, we didn't have large-scale wildland fires to the degree that we do nowadays. So, Chief Fennessy, you might have some comments on that?
Yeah, it seems like yesterday, right? And it's been nearly 20 years. And, we didn't have social media. We didn't have, communications much at all like we do today. And I remember the confusion and the chaos surrounding it. Did we have people burn? Was there an engine up there? There was just, the communication was terrible. And unfortunately, I think it delayed, the ability to evacuate those survivors, Captain McDonald and whatnot. But yeah, and at that time, I think the Cedar Fire stood as the largest fire in California for, up until about 5 years ago, where we've had fires that have eclipsed it even more significantly. But I agree to be able to have, fast forward 20 years to be able to know where all of your crews are on these large incidents, I think would have been a benefit. It could have backed them out where the other units were and could have put them in a safe refuge area. Absolutely, Jeff.
The interesting thing about it is that we at our home base could have been tracking our personnel from 500 miles away. That would have been pretty fantastic. I know at that point in time, we had 3 engine companies assigned to 3 different events. And we really just started hearing the rumors and the gossips about one of your crews was burned. And it was like, well, we've got 3 crews at 3 different fires. Give me more information. I need more information to be able to make that all happen. So I think that there's so many benefits that Florian brings to the table. If I was a working fire chief today, I would place that as my number 1 priority when it came to budget. I'd want every individual that worked for me to have the ability to be tracked when they were on duty, no matter what the event. I think it's that significant and that important. When I look back at the cost of that event to the organization, we spent millions of dollars between workers' comp, the injuries, the benefits that we paid out, the research that we did as an organization, and that was, in my mind, very worthwhile for us because all those things needed to occur when, if I would have had this technology available to me, I would have spent a fraction of that and would have been able to sleep better at night. So I'm a big proponent of what Florian has done. I think it's pretty exciting where it's going. And as we continue to talk, and it's one of the reasons that California Fire Chiefs got involved with your company. We just think that it's our obligation as a professional organization representing the state of California that we're on the look all the time to find out who's doing what, to try and partner with them, to try and give you our opinions and work with the vendors so it's a 2-way street, because oftentimes vendors create tools and equipment without any input from the fire service. And we're peculiar. We kind of know what we want. We might not have the technology or capabilities in-house to be able to build that sort of thing, but we kind of know what we want. And when you look at the breadth and depth of the California Fire Chiefs Association, the members we represent, I think we bring something pretty special to the table, and we know you bring something pretty special to the table.
I appreciate that, Chief. And I know that's really important to us too, is, not being the people to build it, like what are the things that need to be built, but to really co-create with you and build the things that you need. You mentioned something about the expansion of the WUI, right? So the expansion of urban and residential footprints. Obviously that expansion has definitely happened in the 20 years since the Cedar Fire. We also see things like extended lengths of fire seasons, right? When you're talking about those types of incidents. Are you seeing with your constituency any impact to that in terms of the urgency behind procuring new technologies or making these upgrades, given those expansions?
What's pretty ironic about that is the federal government, who generally is pretty slow to change, came up with what we call the Dingle Act. And the Dingle Act is one that required that federal firefighters have tracking devices. Ironically, in our state, we represent about 40 million people. We're kind of the heart of the technology center in America. I guess that's arguable, but I think we, with our Silicon Valley, might take advantage of that. You would think that we would have that as a requirement, but we don't. So as we continue to expand, as our fire season continues, and the ability of this tool to be an all-risk vehicle, it really doesn't matter if the wildland's getting bigger or not. We all have buildings that we respond to. We all have medical emergencies we go to. One of the things that Chief Guy touched on, but I think it's kind of important to talk about, is the fact that as planners, we have relationships with our Emergency Medical Services Authority, and our LEMS is our local Emergency Medical Services Authority. And oftentimes, if we do ambulance transportation, we have requirements about response times. Well, when we have tracking devices that can share when we get to a patient's side, that's pretty dramatic. That really kind of sets a stage, because take Ray's example. a 3 million square foot building, 10 stories tall, and you have a patient up on the 9th floor, how long would it take the Ontario Fire Department upon arriving on scene to get to that patient's side? We would know that exactly with these tracking devices, which is really, really important to us. We have this golden hour that we try and protect when it comes to trauma. And oftentimes in my jurisdictions, we in Nevada, we had a very large horse population where we had ranches with people that had horseback riding, and they would get injured and they would make contact. But sometimes it would take us 20 or 30 minutes to get to the patient's side. Up in South Lake Tahoe, where I was, we have all these wonderful trails and waterfalls and all these nature hikes, and we find a lot of people that aren't accustomed to being in the mountains find themselves in a really bad spot, and they can't. Once they get stuck, there's no way for our rescuers to figure that out. And then add the snow and the ski resorts that add to that. So there's a lot of technology that we can really, really take advantage of. And again, it's kind of why I'm so excited that this is a pretty great time to be in the fire service, because the technology is really going full guns.
Awesome. And Chief Guy, curious your thoughts on that as well, given, your purview is in structure situations, right? Or things where like the time, the distance, the wilderness has, right, to get to the individual might be longer than some of what you're used to. Do you have any, curious your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think Chief Messon brings up a great point on, just because a fire engine gets to an address within the time frame that we want, that doesn't mean that we're going to get the equipment and the people there. And I think, from a strategic standpoint, the data that we start collecting, if you start looking at this type of technology, and I think that in the future, this is me thinking about the future, is the way we respond today is really based upon kind of old data and old response plans. And what I mean by that is, just because someone calls 911, does that mean you need to send a fire engine code 3 to that call every single time, right? I would argue, no, you don't, because depending on what type of call it is, does it, we get a lot of firefighters hurt and killed going code 3, lights and sirens to incidents. So we as fire chiefs have to start asking those questions. Does that still make sense to do that? Should we be utilizing the technology and leveraging the technology that we have to make smarter decisions for future response plans, right? So looking at taking it a step further, could you use this type of technology to start creating some databases to really understand, from the time someone calls 911 to the time that you actually get a responder right next to that person that's treating them, doing patient care, those types of things? Would that or could that create a different response model for us in the future, right? Because it could create a much smarter, more informed way to utilize our resources in a much more efficient manner than we are today. Because right now, a lot of departments, someone calls 911, well, you send them code 3, and that's it, right? So the point is, if you had this extension of really understanding, this will take some time to really track this stuff and understand it. But I think this brings up some potential opportunities there to really change the way we look at emergency response altogether, especially from an EMS or even a fire perspective. But it's something interesting to think about.
Yeah, that definitely is. And I'm curious if any of our attendees too that are on if questions or input on that one too, they could put thoughts as well as questions into that Q&A box, because that is fascinating when we think about how it could change operations entirely. Chief Fennessy, curious your thoughts too. Now Ray's got me thinking about the future of firefighting, not just operationally, but also from an incident perspective. Right now, there is a lot of talk about future impending mega events where something like a major earthquake to strike, tsunami, right? We've seen these predictions. When it comes to those and the fires, the hazards, the situations that could result from those that we will have to respond to were those to happen. How can technology help in the preparation stage as well before that event? Not just operationally, but just physically how you prepare today for the potential events in the future.
Well, I think, that's what we spend a good chunk of our time doing is preparing for, emergencies and disasters. And doesn't matter how big your fire department is, we can't do it alone. It's everything is done regionally or statewide. Even, the mutual aid system is based on, assistance that will go out as far as international experience. I do want to go back to one thing that Chief Meston mentioned and about it being a priority for, fire departments to be able to track their personnel and where on the priority pile it is. And I'll tell you, it definitely is. And I think what I've enjoyed about working with some of the 3 a.m. staff is their flexibility in terms of working with us and other agencies when it comes to cost, when it comes to phasing, rollout, that sort of thing. Commissioner Teal, Adam Teal, out of the city of Philadelphia, he and I are very good friends, and we've talked about this product, quite a bit. And I know they are implementing, much more rapidly than I think a lot of us are. But it is, in our budget preparation on our list, and the folks that I've worked with and talked with, and my staff that have worked with, those at 3 a.m. have found it to be a very good experience, and not like many of our vendor experiences. The relationships that we've built with your folks that understand our needs and have been flexible have been outstanding. So we're very much looking at implementing in the beginning of our next fiscal year. And so I just want to give a shout out to you all for that. It's been a really great experience. On the large scale, we here in Orange County operate one of the 28 urban search and rescue task forces that FEMA funds. And, there's a lot of discussion about how to track, whether it be during an earthquake, largely large collapse zones, where are our people? And if you talk to the folks that have been with the USAR system for a long time, going back to hurricanes, Katrina, back on the pile in New York and those sorts of things, many times they don't know where their people are. And, they're relying upon, those individuals' trainings and check-ins or PARs, as we like to call it, those sorts of things, personal accountability. But we don't have the ability to do that. And to, Chief Geik's point, we've got somebody down in a building, big or small, and the chief is actually right. I mean, is spot on. Firefighters, traumatic line of duty death, fire in structures has not changed. It has not. And it's not that they're being lost or killed in these large structures. They're being killed in 1,000, 1,200 foot square structures. And our ability to get to those people, is key. And for years, we've talked about, I think somebody mentioned the Holy Grail. Well, the military have been tracking people for years, right? We've all seen that. And there are other companies that are able to track. But tracking where you're able to capture elevation, that's the key. Are they on the first floor, the third floor, the fifth floor? It's no good to us unless we're able to know, elevation wise and to have that. So this is the first company that I'm aware of that's been able to do that for us. And it's something we've all been waiting for in the fire service for a long time. So I don't want to keep talking. I know I think we've got 10 minutes left for questions. So I don't want to eat up all the time. The other two chiefs really did a great job of sharing the need.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chief Hennessy. And certainly that level of partnership is reciprocated. We appreciate all the input you guys have given us to make that better and to provide you with those things that were so badly needed. My last question, and it's for any of you, I guess, Chief Meston, if you want to start, but you told me once that this is the first time CalChiefs has partnered with a private company in its history, right, as an organization. Why 3 a.m.? Why did you choose us?
Well, yes, CalChiefs been around a little bit of time, not as long as Ontario Fire, but it's our 126th anniversary this year. So we've been around a little bit, and probably are the oldest fire organization within the state of California. As we worked with the executive board of directors, we recognize that we have relationships with vendors, but we didn't necessarily have an intimate relationship with a lot of vendors. And we believe that the use of technology, particularly out of this state, is super important. And you guys were easily accessible to us. You listened to what we have to say. And it's an incredible partnership, and that's what we like to look at it from that arena. So, we're really pleased to have you as our strategic partner, because running any organization, you really have to look at where you are today and where you're going to be in the future, and then you have to adapt to that. And an old organization like ours, it took a board of directors that we've had over the last several years to finally say, we need to start looking forward, and we need to start projecting forward. And we have relationships with vendors, but we need to have intimate relationship with vendors, because we all have needs. And let's face it, technology changes on a dime. Apple comes out with a new phone every year. So we know that we have to stay on top of that. So when we as a board of directors got together and we started looking at what made sense, there's my 20-year-long plea that we need to be able to know where our people are, and we need to give them a round trip ticket home. So you were a natural. But I'll turn this over now to Ray, because he was actually the president at the time that we entered into this partnership. And he's a pretty insightful guy. City of Ontario does some pretty incredible things, quite honestly, as an organization. And I'm kind of in awe of the guy, actually. But I'll turn it over to him now.
Too kind, Jeff. So it's interesting. I remember the first time I heard about 3 a.m. I was driving down the freeway, and I was talking to the late Bobby Halton on the phone. And he was the editor-in-chief at Fire Engineering. And was a good friend of mine. I used to write for a competitive magazine back in the day, but I always kept in touch with Bobby, and we were always good friends. And he told me about this company 3 a.m. and this guy Patrick I had to give a call to. So I asked him, well, what's so exciting about this company? And he told me what's so exciting about 3 a.m. And so I called Patrick that day, and he called me back, and we set up a conversation and started talking about what you guys are doing at 3 a.m. in Florian. And I brought this to the board, and I said, hey, this is an interesting opportunity for us. I think, one of the things that, we were interested in doing is changing a bit of our business model in CalChiefs, and really partnering with companies that are innovative, that were bringing some good things to the California Fire Service. And quite frankly, at CalChiefs, we know we have a pretty good voice in the state. And what we really wanted to do was take an opportunity to say, hey, is there an opportunity for us to partner with technology companies that are doing really innovative things, that we can help them and they can help us? And our goal at CalChiefs was really to partner with people that were already doing really good stuff, but were willing to listen and say, hey, this is what we need. Can you help us build this? And 3 a.m. Florian were already well on their way to building that. But I think we have a great partnership in that. I think you're excited to hear from us. I mean, to hear from Chief Hennessy and Chief Meston, and these guys are pretty big deals in the state of California from the fire service standpoint. And the reality is that I think it's great to work with private industry that's interested in the fire service, but more importantly, interested in helping us build the technology that we need that's going to help what we do. And that's this first partnership that we developed was with you guys, and that was because of a lot of the things that Chief Hennessy had talked about. And so we're excited about where the partnership's going to go, and we're excited to see 3 a.m. get out there more and see, because it's just going to start developing better and better and better. And the more we use, and some of the other use cases that we didn't even touch on, and I know I've been hounding you guys on this piece, is not just the tracking piece, but and I know Chief Hennessy was talking about large incidents, in California, earthquakes and fires and everything else. we have to do damage assessments, and we have to tie in this technology to our EOCs, and having the ability for our firefighters eventually to have cell phones. Everyone's got cell phones, to be able to go out and snap a picture, snap a video of what's going on from a damage assessment standpoint, and tie that into the actual incident of where that's at, and geolocate that. That's incredibly important information for our EOCs and doing those types of things. So I think this is just the beginning of what we can do with this technology. If you look at what's going on today, it's incredibly exciting. And if you look at what's potentially coming down just in a year from now, 2 years from now, and then ultimately, shoot, where can we be 5 years from now with this type of technology? I think it'll just continue to build on itself. And the other thing I do like about working with 3AM is they're open to integrating other vendors, so they're not afraid to to share what they're doing and try to integrate. And that's unfortunately kind of rare in some of the tech space today. So we're excited to work with you.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because it's definitely one of the things that we're most passionate about is whatever is needed. That's what's important to invest the time and effort into creating. So we are dedicated to that effort. It doesn't have to be ours. If something is out there today, let's just pull it in. Let's make it work for you and make it easy to get it in your hands and be useful. So thank you very much for that. Speaking of the tech, Ryan, don't go far. The one of the questions that we have in our Q&A here, and I think we can kind of summarize it. Specifically, there are questions about, can drone video be viewed through this application? There's also questions about other kinds of data in the application. So for example, some examples were vehicle speed, response times. Can you touch a little bit on other kinds of data in the platform?
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much, Chiefs. I mean, it's really special for me. I'm a nerd and a student to the service. You guys are all legends in your own right, and this is amazing, amazing honor. Yeah, from a drone standpoint, absolutely. I think we all know these are tools that are used heavily. I know Chief Fennessy and his operation has like absolutely stunning aerial operations, but many are just trying to ease themselves into trying to bring some of this view into play. The city of New York, for example, uses them heavily to the point that they cannot imagine not using them now. So I think that is clearly a need that is coming. And I think there are ways for that to become more accessible. So for us on those workspaces I showed you, the easiest way is we can do a real-time, very fast integration with a video feed, which of course can include a drone, et cetera. And we can do that really quickly. So if there's just something that wasn't maybe part of your equipment, part of your fleet, but we have a feed, we can channel that into the incident so we can create that awareness. Of course, if it is part of your feed, to kind of speak a little bit to Chief Geik, like we can have geospatial understanding of where that drone exists in space and then tap into it. So both pathways are possible. The second one just takes a little bit of time to work together. What's the vendor that you're working with? Let's get that bridge set up so that it's all automatic and available to you. But the other one, certainly easily on the data point. You brought also vehicle speeds and what was the other thing? Response times, like just kind of all coordinated. Yeah, so I mean, obviously from there, we can obviously see your whole crew, we can see your apparatus, but then we can see your people as well. And all of those data points exist, and based on the frequency that you want, our average is at least every 2 seconds. Can be more aggressive than that if you want, or less depending. But we can take that data and of course can help you with reporting and understanding, from turnout time to response time, conclusion, et cetera. All that data is there for you. And we can obviously, take that data and help to inspire reporting, NIFRs, things like that. 209 is the 29A, for example. These sorts of things we can help to feed the information that we have within the system. But it is an open-ended API, and we will continuously push for that. To Chief Geik's kind of comments and Chief Fennessy, Meston, we've spoken about what tools do you have. Our hand is out. Let's shake. Let's make it happen and get what you need, where you need it, how you need it. It's critical to us.
Amazing. Thank you, Ryan. And there was a comment more than question also in our Q&A. Seems like something that the OES department in California should be leading the charge with in terms of funding. More comment than question. I'll just say I agree. We're constantly, seeking out ways to make sure that this can get into the hands where it's needed. and partnering and working with any organization to make that possible and make it accessible is always on our radar. So I'll just comment on that one with a nod of agreement.
I'll comment on that really quick, Chrissy. I think that's Chief Walder, and I think it's very talk about the Dingle Act and what Jeff was talking about with the federal. Those are types of things that CalChiefs that we can work with our partners and look at those options as funding mechanisms, right? And that's the shame of this. And Chief Fennessy had mentioned it about where do you put this on your list of all the other things that we need to budget for every year and so on and so forth. And is there opportunities there to reduce the barrier to entry to this type of technology? And I think that's where we can come in, I think, and talk to those folks in the state legislature and try to, carve out some of that funding opportunities there. And those are great things to look at in the future as well. And as long as we can show the need for what we're trying to do in the fire service, I think there's some opportunities in the future to look at that.
Amazing. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Chiefs, we're at time. Thank you each and every one of you for joining us today. Thank you for your partnership with 3 a.m. We are humbled and grateful for that and for all the work that you do. I don't have enough words for that gratitude, so I'll just leave it with a thank you. For all the folks on the call, I'll quickly pop up our info for you. Let's see if it'll do it here. But if you want to get in touch with us, with any of the folks, am I sharing? Yes. With any of the folks on the call today, that's where you can find us, at least on the internet. So go ahead and reach out. Thank you for joining. Chiefs, always a pleasure. And we'll see you real soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Take care all. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.